Hello, this is Valeria Hutchings. Today I'm going to be talking about how rich nations fuel structural violence in Myanmar. This presentation is meant to be a brief observation of the effects of foreign investments in Myanmar's oil and gas industries. The country has been occupied by a military coup since February 2021. Evidence shows that countries such as the US, China, and Russia are taking advantage of the natural resource markets and trading weapons while disregarding human rights violations. And this is done in order to push their conflicting agendas in the event of a shifting global order. So here's a brief history of Myanmar. It gained independence from Britain in 1948 and was a parliamentary republic known as Burma. It endured 50 years of military rule when General Ne Win held a military coup in 1962. He wrote a new constitution in 1974, and around that time, they had established Myanmar Oil and Gas Enterprise in order to produce major income. By 1988, Burma was a failing state with widespread corruption. Ne Win stepped down, but there was another dictator. By 2007, there was the Saffron Revolution, where people went on strike and protested high gas and oil prices. The military regime started to step down as it created a new democratic institution in 2008. However, many believe they did this in order to attract new foreign investments and decrease their reliance on China. They were officially dissolved in 2011. However, the government structure under the constitution allowed that a quarter of parliament seats were reserved for the military and that they automatically headed several defense ministries. By 2015, Aung San Suu Kyi won the first multi-party presidential election under the NLD party. However, unfortunately, in 2016, the Rohingya genocide resulted in the death of tens of thousands of people, mass rape, and over 2 million people displaced. And unfortunately, despite her Nobel Peace Prize, Aung San did excuse the military and deny their actions in initiating the genocide. By 2019, the NLD won another round of parliamentary elections, and Aung San Suu Kyi won the 2020 presidential election. However, the junta accused her of electoral fraud in both of these elections. By February 1st, 2021, General Min Aung Hlaing ousted Aung San Suu Kyi in a coup, and the State Administration Council was implemented as a new regime. Also, the National Unity Government was the unofficial government formed out of ousted NLD lawmakers, activists, and minorities who had come together because they were all being oppressed by the military junta. Here are some human rights violations. Over 2,300 deaths of citizens, including 130 children, murder, rape, and other forms of sexual violence, forced disappearance, torture, deprivations of liberties, open fire on protesters, and many Buddhist nationalists in the Tatmadaw supported the ethnic genocide of the Rohingya and discrimination against other minorities. Violence has actually been increasing in recent months between resistance groups and the Tatmadaw because resources have become more scarce. And then the Rohingya genocide is technically still going, and progress made for women and minorities over the past decade have been rolled back. Here's a little bit of what everyday life looks like in Myanmar. The most important ones to point out are that the government structure has been dissolved, executive functions and judicial functions have been taken over by high-ranking military officials during martial law. And then a lot of people can be imprisoned for humanitarian aid distribution because a lot of the welfare systems and infrastructure aren't working sufficiently under the military junta. Also, anyone involved in any sort of resistance against the military junta can be jailed. And one tactic they use is to go after their families, even if they aren't involved. Next, who's responsible? The USA was quick to sanction high-ranking military officials in minerals industries, but it still has not gone after gas and oil companies. It provides US dollars to the largest state-owned enterprise, Moji, in exchange for oil, and this is done through private companies. The US has sanctioned most companies, but not Moji. And additionally, contracts with these private companies and Moji and other enterprises require exchanges to be made in US dollars, and this gives the State Administration Council huge purchasing power to buy weapons, since the Myanmar kyat has sank in value. And so, in turn, this allows them to maintain a stronghold and continue the violence on people. So, Western companies like Shell, PTT, Total, and Chevron were operating during the beginning of the junta, but they claim to have withdrawn after rounds of sanctions from the EU and partial sanctions from the US, but a lot of them are still partially involved in other projects in Myanmar. For example, Chevron and Total have only withdrawn their project in Yadana, and even though it is a major oil reserve, there are still other small projects that they're involved with. And they've been making public statements to excuse themselves. For example, I believe Chevron said that they really don't make that much revenue off of Myanmar oil and gas, but they also claim that they cannot fully withdraw because it can't control what's going on in the ground situation of the junta. And so, since the military controls the state websites, they don't really report how much money they've been making from the remaining gas and oil foreign investments. And additionally, these private companies are able to not report the full amount by having loopholes and all sorts of processes. So China is another main direct buyer of oil because it has pipelines connecting to Myanmar. It also invests in Myanmar gas fields. Then another way for the military to make other foreign investments is that it has auctioned off gems and minerals to earn additional revenue. So that leads me to my next point, the arms trading. Russia, China, Serbia, and Singapore are the main exporters. China and Russia have sold armored vehicles, helicopters, fighter jets. Serbia has given rockets and artillery. Singapore has also given aircraft. And it's very important to note that they are trading these weapons in US dollars. And it's ironic because China and Russia are competing with the US to become the global hegemon. And it's ironic that they're all exchanging the same currency and resources. So, additionally, there are 38 Singapore companies with links to 78 companies in Myanmar that broker for the military because Singapore is seen as the financial hub for the Tatmadaw to get away with illegal practices in its conglomerate businesses. Additionally, most of the companies that are currently trading weapons have been doing this since the Rohingya genocide, and some of these companies have been doing it even further before. So next, it's important to point out other perpetrators of the junta because they have a deep-rooted history of gaining disproportionate power. For example, when Aung San Suu Kyi was elected, some thought that she would be a puppet for the military. In fact, she did allow the military to form a conglomerate of domestic and foreign companies in order to build wealth. The companies range from natural resource markets to tourism markets. And so even if they were fully sanctioned, they do have those domestic revenues. And then additionally, Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, agreed to a 5-point block with the junta. However, they haven't really made progress towards monitoring and implementing the junta's ability to follow those rules. And so it hasn't really helped at all. And ASEAN has also not engaged with civil society groups or the NUG, which is crucial to the peacemaking process. The bigger picture. Unfortunately, the US is unlikely to beat the military junta by using complete sanctions. However, it is still very immoral that they have any transactions with the military regime at all. The regime is likely to find other countries or entities to trade its resources. However, the current sanctions that are in place are actually making the working people of Myanmar suffer more because they're only partial. Also, the U.S. government structure has made progress towards complete sanctioning very slow. For example, the Burma Act was introduced in the House in order to completely sanction Moji, and it did pass in the House in July, but it still has not passed in the Senate. And I think that says a lot about U.S. lawmakers' interests with these private companies. John Sifton, the Asia Advocacy Director for Human Rights Watch, said, "This is like administering only half dosages of medicine and then hoping it'll work like a full dose." So in conclusion, The UN urges that there aren't enough targeted sanctions that have been put into place in order to effectively discourage the military junta. The U.S. needs to take responsibility for the end of its investments into Myanmar oil industries so that it can play a part in the peacemaking process, since it is responsible. This situation represents a continuation in the U.S. and other rich countries' contradictory approach to defending dictatorships. The U.S., Western countries, China, and Russia need to set aside their motivations to become the dominant military and economic powers in order to focus on making a more sustainable and peaceful world.